it's not something that I openly talk about or admit with like the Rapids community or anything. I feel like it's this dark secret that I mention in passing and never becomes a real issue. So yeah, like outing myself and everything, like.
All right, and we are back again, episode 43 of the Box to Box podcast. If you don't know who I am, my name is Jose Tejas. I am the primary host of this show. I am joined by a very special guest. I'll tee him up with a great intro here in just one sec. But before I do, I say it every single video. Guys, if you haven't done so already, like the video down below, subscribe to the channel. If you are a fan of the beautiful game, and more importantly, a fan of growing the beautiful game here in the States and in North America, you're going to like the mission that we're on here at GOLZtv and at Box to Box. So again, please subscribe to the channel and keep up to date with all of the special guests that we bring on to help make this game more relatable for the next generation of fans. All right. And as always, Box to Box presented by GOLZtv, GOLZtv, where you can find all of your free, unlimited fan-made footy content today. All right, got the intro out of the way. Now, teeing up our special guest for today. This guy is, I would say, when it comes to all of the other guests that we've had on the show, a seasoned veteran when it comes to content creation, creating written content, audio content that really builds up this game in a great way, makes it relatable for fans, plays directly into our mission, and what I would consider to be kind of the voice of the fan out there in the Colorado area. We'll talk about it. We have Matt Pollard from Holding the High Line and the Burgundy Wave on the show today. Matt, how are you, my man?
Jose, I'm good. We were just talking before we hit the record button, coming up on the weekend and everything, and just, excited. It's I think we're into fake spring number 3 here in Colorado, but we got snow the other night when I was driving back from Colorado Springs to see Hailstorm get their win over Switchbacks in extra time. So I'm excited. We're getting into the season, and hopefully sometime in the next couple of weeks, I'll be in the press box at DSG, and I won't be wearing long sleeves.
Hopefully. And look, man, I feel you on the weather front. We're in Dallas now. It was 91 on Monday. It is 55 today. This bipolar weather, man, I can't keep up with it. It's on another level. I like the term fake spring.
Yes.
Well, look, man, I'm glad that you're here. We're going to have a great conversation about your journey as a fan, as a content creator with the beautiful game. But before we get to any of that, the question I'm going to ask, I ask every single guest. Matt, who are you today?
I am a California native who has become a Colorado convert who loves socializing around nature and physical activity and the things that I enjoy.
I love that, man. Great response, short and sweet. I love it. All right. Now, let's talk a little bit deeper, I would say, into that question, right? Starting with your journey as, I think, more as a fan before we get to the content creation part. That's obviously how you're defined today. But going back to kind of how you were brought into this game, your origins come from California. You're in Colorado now. How did this journey start, right? You have a massive passion, not just for soccer, but for the American soccer landscape. What were your earliest memories of this game?
4 years old, AYSO. Me and my little brother, we loved running around. We didn't necessarily like running for the sake of running, but running for the sake of doing something. My dad's actually a hockey player going back. He didn't play like professionally or anything, but he pushed me and my brother towards hockey, and hockey was great. There were some limitations with it in Southern California relative to soccer, and we needed something to do in the summer and in the spring when it wasn't hockey season, and soccer was a viable option for that. And so I got to get out a lot of energy that I had that was pent up. No hitting, unfortunately. Too many red cards happen, unlike in hockey. And so I kind of, the duality of my personality of, I think, growing up in my social circles as well, were surrounded around the 3 main activities that I had, which were soccer, hockey, and then we won't get into this as well. I was also a marching band nerd. I was an aspiring Renaissance man when I was a freshman in high school. Maybe retroactively, my better answer to your question, Jose, is I'm a Colorado convert Renaissance man.
I love that, man. That's a great way to define yourself. And look, I mean, we can dig into it if you'd like. I think the whole marching band aspect of it all, but nonetheless, man, it sounds like you were doing a lot as a kid. At what point did soccer start to really take precedent?
Yeah, so I think the fact that I started playing soccer and understanding the game was also when I started watching soccer, and then that corresponded with the 1994 World Cup. And then I would say most of then my focus around soccer was mostly playing through my adolescence career and everything. I'd been to a Galaxy game in 1996. I actually played in a marching band competition back at Home Depot Center as well, which in hindsight, when I look back at it now, is a very cathartic, I can say that I took the field in competition for that. Not in soccer, not in a random high school or college football game, but I did something competitively on the same field where Landon Donovan and David Beckham won MLS Cups. I think that's pretty cool. So, but then it was MLS when I think there was interesting stuff happening around the league. Obviously, I paid attention to the Galaxy, but they weren't as high as the Los Angeles Kings were, certainly when I was growing up, in my family at least. And then I think it was really around the World Cups got bigger. So I think 2002 was a real nexus event for me. And maybe if we're going into from a media standpoint, 2010, the Landon Donovan goal against Algeria, that elevated me as well. So I would say I was an MLS person, certainly from the start. I wouldn't say that I became really an MLS sicko until the mid to late 2000s as well. And then I've been a proper, general soccer sicko for probably a good 10, 15 years at this point.
Yeah, man. Seriously. I mean, I like the term sicko, by the way. I've seen it in more than a few places, right? You mentioned it in your writing. You mentioned it on social media, right? You're taking a video of how many fans are left. I'm sure this is a time of the year when the Rapids games are maybe it's freezing, it's snowing. You got a few people still left in the stands. I love the fact that, we're all a little bit sicko, right? When it comes to how we support our teams. But I mean, you got to do it. They need someone out there, cheering them on and getting those 3 points so we can make that trip worth it. I love it, man. So you mentioned LA Galaxy. You mentioned being a Colorado convert. I know you've written a lot of good stuff about the Galaxy. Do you feel like you were supporting them as a young fan? And like primarily, was that your primary club as far as MLS clubs go? And when did the Rapids start to kind of take over?
Yeah, so I mean, it's so funny you asked this, Jose, because it's not something that I openly talk about or admit with the Rapids community or anything. I feel like it's this dark secret that I mention in passing and never becomes a real issue. So yeah, outing myself and everything. I moved to Colorado in late 2015 for my first job out of school. I wanted to get away from California. My family on my mom's side is originally from the Midwest, mostly from Michigan. I'm used to seasons. I wanted to have fall. I was willing to have winter in order to get fall. And I wanted nature opportunities, and not nature opportunities in we're in Los Angeles and we have to drive 2 hours away to get truly into nature. I'm talking 30, 45 minutes and then a 20-minute walk off the highway and everything. And you could be in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin where there's a town of 10,000 people in the middle of nowhere. That is the environment that I wanted and everything. And so obviously I was covering MLS at that point. I started with Last Word on Soccer, who I'm still with in some capacity. In 2014, I covered St. Louis FC in their first year of existence. But obviously at that time, the site was mostly an MLS blog, starting to dabble into the national team game, and any beat writer they could get who could get a credential and not have any spelling errors they were willing to accept at that point. So I covered St. Louis FC locally, but when it came to our MLS culture and everything, the Galaxy was the team I knew. The Galaxy was the team I was a fan of as well. You could have a little bit of a discussion about how much some of our people were homers and everything. I would say very quickly into this for me, Jose, I removed kind of that component for me. Josh Getzman would be a great person from Corner of the Galaxy for you to have on the show, but he has this analogy about putting on the reporter hat, and then at that point, whatever personal allegiances or fandom you have for that's removed. Matt Doyle has mentioned kind of in passing that over the time working in MLSsoccer.com is beaten the New York Red Bulls fan out of him, just because it was a necessary thing for him to do what he does at this point. And so, somewhere deep down buried in me, Jose, is that 4-year-old kid who watched Alexi Lawless at the Rose Bowl, who loves MLS. Somewhere in there is the kid who went and saw Kobe Jones score in 1990, whatever it is and everything, that secretly wants the LA Galaxy to win MLS Cup. And the way that I've navigated in my journey, the way that I'm most useful to the soccer community, the way that I'm most useful to lady football, to use a Ted Lasso analogy, is in my current role where that fandom's allowed to exist, but it's mostly private and it does not affect any of my content that I'm putting out there publicly. And in that regard, I think I'm in a really healthy position, not being a Colorado native, not being so emotionally attached to the Colorado Rapids, to where I can cover them objectively, I can cover them critically. I still obviously am dabbling in covering in the LA Galaxy. There's a lot of stuff, as I'm sure you're well, Jose, that you can't do from a content standpoint if you're not local, not part of the community. So I can look from a distance and I can observe and I can have informed opinions and everything. But the stuff that I do really well from a Rapids standpoint that I think is increasingly valuable with where local and independent coverage of the teams are is simply being in the room, being well informed, having relationships, asking critical questions, and then providing that information for other people to, do with. Jose, how many times do we see you think like First Take or Undisputed, for example, where they're going off of a quote that was said because some beat writer for the Tampa Bay Times, who's been covering the Bucks forever, knew the relationship, knew exactly what to ask Tom Brady, and then they spin that off into a 20-minute argument or something. In that regard, I'm the primary source for Rapids content, and I'm also I think the first level of authority for providing that base content for other people to do great work. That gives me great purpose. That gives me great energy. It just so happens that it suppresses my inner fan.
I love that, man. Yeah, your inner fan, you got to check it sometimes, right? I mean, you mentioned before removing emotion and removing bias from the coverage that you're putting out there. And more importantly, right, for I don't know how many new fans are moving into the area and how much that Rapids fan base is really kind of expanding. But before we get deep into that part of it, I'm really kind of curious because I imagine you were still covering the Galaxy in a pretty solid capacity when a lot of that team was kind of transitioning into this new phase that they're in. So with the Galaxy, there's so much that has happened to that team over the last 10 plus years. I still remember Carlos Ruiz, him prior to him transferring over to FC Dallas, being that kind of go-to guy. And then right before the era, I call it the era of superstars, really kind of came into play. And these global icons started, making their way into MLS, and LA Galaxy was their entry point, right? You think about Beckham coming to LA Galaxy. You think about Steven Gerrard. You think about Zlatan Ibrahimovic and what that really did for the league. But as someone who was a fan and putting out content that offered unique takes around where the Galaxy was going, how did you think about those moves the team was making? What was it like to be a fan of a team like that?
Yeah, I mean, it was mismanagement, Jose. I think it's very easy in hindsight for us to say Bruce Arena was the brain trust of everything that was going on behind that club. And when he was gone, there was infrastructure that other clubs would have had in place that just was not there, or it left out of his brain as well. You think about eventually Bill Belichick's no longer going to be the head coach of the New England Revolution, the New England Patriots. How much of that gets removed as well? And, Siggy Smith would have whole scouting teams and, where's this list and analytics of, we need a left back. Where's our forward that we really like within MLS that we could get for this amount of allocation money? Where are those overseas that could be domestic players in MLS that we could go to? And the reality is all of that was in Bruce Arena and his filing tablets, and more realistically probably in his brain and on his computer, and they didn't really have that. So the question that I had certainly coming in is that you had a lot of business people who had been around the club during the good times. How much of that institutional knowledge via osmosis had transferred. And I think it turned very quickly when you saw Kurt Onalfo not even be given, I don't know, was it half a year, maybe 2/3 of a year? He didn't make it to the end of his first season, that wasn't really there. And really they're a club that's kind of lost their way. You've had a lot of business people who've committed regicide in order to kind of protect themselves going on. I'm Klein out, just to put that on the record as well. I think he's bad for the club. I think he's protected himself. He's held other people accountable while also himself not being held accountable by anyone with the last name Hinchy or Anschutz as well. And so I like Greg Vanney. I like what they've done from I generally like the roster build and what they've done and how they've improved. I still think they're chasing too many stars. I don't think Chicharito's back with the team. Douglas Costa, I think, has ended up, being a bust as well. But Zlatan Ibrahimovic papered over the cracks decently for about 18 months. And I think that got into the thought of, okay, are they actually improving? And I think the reality is they're a club that I think was in far more need of a proper rebuild than they actually had. But with that fan base and with that ownership, there's no real patience or anything. And I think they've certainly paid the price for that. I like Greg Vanney. I do want to believe that they're headed in a good direction as well. They're a fundamentally flawed roster build because of some of their circumstances. And I don't know where they go from here, given the fact that leadership is still being allowed to exist without any level of accountability in Chris Fine.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I think it's weird. And weird's probably the most. It's probably the most accurate word I could think of at this time as an outsider to the Galaxy fan base. It's just remembering what this legacy club stood for prior to the celebrity walk that has kind of come and gone through the Galaxy since then, and what they kind of stand for now. Major transition. Not really what they used to be, and now the noisy neighbors next door. And I'm really curious to see how you feel about this as being a California native. LAFC has come in and really put a stranglehold on that market, right? And now with the star now above that badge and everything that they kind of stand for across that fan base and that city. I mean, what is your take on how quickly LAFC have grounded themselves within MLS?
LAFC are the little brother that hit a growth spurt and are now the bigger, younger brother of the LA Galaxy. And I think it's sickening. It's also it's perfectly fitting in that like the Galaxy have the end of their dynasty and like the start of their, I think it was, I might have the stat wrong, but I believe in terms of like points per game, it was their worst season in club history the year before LAFC comes in as well. And so if you're looking at the neutral, or if you're looking at in the same way that maybe a bunch of people who weren't the MLS sickos out there in the greater New York area thinking about who to actually join when NYCFC came into town and everything, like the timing was absolutely horrible. There were so many eyeballs and the hearts and minds of people who could have been captured and willing to go down to Carson, California, which I consider part of Los Angeles. If you want to talk about the actual markets and where people are and everything, technically the only true LA teams that you have are the ones that play at Staples Center. LAFC fans want to talk about that. That's totally acceptable for me, Jose. I would ask them to be consistent in that regard. Technically, it's UCLA, technically it's the Inglewood Bruins, for example. But in any case, so yeah, I think LAFC fans have every right to puff out their chest and be proud and to talk trash to somebody wearing a green and gold scarf on the other side of the street and everything. They own the city, and rightfully so. They're defending MLS Cup and Supporters Shield champions. They've got the celebrity aspect behind it, which the LA Galaxy had times under David Beckham. But if the cast of Ted Lasso is in town, they're going to an LAFC game. They're not going to they're not going to an LA Galaxy game. So it's certainly frustrating. It's infuriating from a roster standpoint that like you don't see that, and then that doesn't drive you to actually be better. Say what you will about NYCFC and everything, it forced New York Red Bulls to, I think, look at internally who they were and ways in which they could be a better version of themselves as well. And so far, the Galaxy have failed in that regard.
Yeah, I think that for me, it also kind of moves the conversation into how are legacy clubs keeping up with the fandom and the noise that expansion clubs are making in MLS. And I think it's a very interesting conversation. I mean, off screen right before the show today, we were talking about how annoyed I get as an FC Dallas fan listening to the honeymoon phase crowd that is Austin FC and having to deal with how noisy they are, despite the fact that they've won nothing. But with that said, I'm also kind of jealous, right? I live in a market where I feel like we, as SC Dallas fan, we haven't been the most successful club, but I feel like we have this layer of consistency when it comes to positive seasons, winning seasons, developing youth talent. That's kind of all the things that we're known for. When I think about what our trajectory looks like as a legacy clubs, I'm sure many Rapids fans think about that as well. How do you even begin to think on all the traction that expansion clubs have seen? And now you look at St. Louis City FC, I mean, an amazing start to the season and how long they plan to keep that going. I don't know. Can legacy clubs keep up?
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult question. I think, what was it? Was the MLS University, didn't that come out like a couple weeks ago, Jose, about talking about that? And like, honestly, I think Don Garber's got a point. Jose, if you were to pitch it, let's say FC Dallas and Colorado Rapids don't exist. Let's say they're never even in the conversation for MLS, whatso have you. And KSC and then the Hunt family come in and they pitch what the club currently is right now. They're not even on the second cut for expansion teams right now.
Yeah.
Like, forget Las Vegas, I can't remember what the other one, San Diego that everybody's talking about. Like if somebody from Indianapolis has pitched an indie MLS team, that is on par with where currently the existing infrastructure and setup and the stadium and the location and maybe the model and how much they're spending and the ownership situation are that the Rapids and that FC Dallas are at. So, absolutely every single time a new expansion team comes in, just the fact that you've got a billionaire willing to use this as their toy and play ever, higher, more expensive expansion fees, that raises the expectations for what that individual needs to have and what that individual is going to bring to and add to the leagues. And don't get me wrong, a rising tide raises all boats and everything. But at this point, like, the Rapids are in a raft and we're up S River without enough paddles at this point. And you compare that to the yacht that St. Louis is sailing down the Mississippi, for example, or I guess the yacht ferry, for example. So, it's tough. It's struggling. I look at the Chicago Fire, who are playing in Soldier Field, and maybe in a couple of years they're going to be the only attendance in Soldier Field, and they get like 7,000 people. And even if they were to get 15 or 20, maybe, that would still look like a cavernous, empty stadium that is on par with MLS 1.0, and let's face it, the Rapids playing with 14,000 people at Mile High just over that way for me personally. So, it's a tough thing to think about. I don't know how these legacy teams catch up without doing a rebrand. I think Sporting Kansas City has handled it really well. The Galaxy get away with it because of the market they're in and the amount of money that they spend. Red Bull Arena is a fantastic stadium. It's in a poor location for me. I don't know how that's getting any better. So I think realistically, a lot of these legacy teams have been left behind. And there are certain markets where it's adaptable to what you could handle. You look at Columbus, for example. You get the right owner who wants to be there in the right stadium situation, and it would work perfectly. And I remember there was a Nutmeg News article that said 10 things that Stan Kroenke could do that would help the Colorado Rapids, and all 10 of them were sell the team to somebody who cares. If you were to I think Jeff Bezos is originally from Colorado. And if there was a billionaire from Colorado who had no interest in working with the Broncos whatsoever, and you were to sell it to somebody who really cared about that, then I think that would be even before then, and then just have somebody hands-on investing in, let's make this the best that it can be. Even if we're staying in Commerce City, upgrading the stadium and the facilities and everything, that'd be a huge net positive for the club. But these owners don't go away lightly and only on their own terms and only after making a huge profit. I don't blame the league for thinking there's some ways that internally we can push it, but I think it's a valid question. And I also think for me, from that standpoint, I had a number of conversations in the first couple of years with Atlanta United. They've traveled well, surprisingly, for games coming out here to Commerce City. And there was a dismissal for anything that came before Atlanta United. And there was almost a presumption of trophies that existed prior to the modern era of MLS were somehow worth less. I can make an argument, Jose, when there were only 6 teams in the NHL for 40 years, that the number of Stanley Cups that those original 6 teams had was a little bit inflated. I don't think DC United's dynasty should be belittled because it was in MLS 1.0. And I don't believe that Atlanta United's playoff success should be seen as superior to the Colorado Rapids when both of them have one MLS Cup.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that no previous accomplishments should be diminished, right? I think at the end of the day, everything expands. If it's growing the right way, everything expands, everything gets bigger, gets better, but it doesn't take away from what's already come before it. In fact, you can argue that was the foundation for which the expansion club teams are seeing succce, right?
Yeah,
so
the Rapids have walked so that other teams could run, albeit at the expense of the Rapids falling to the back of the race.
Yeah. And I definitely feel that. So let's transition into that conversation, right? Being a Rapids fan. And if you had to summarize that, I think I asked you this question when you and I first met. How would you summarize being a Rapids fan today?
Pain, schadenfreude, I don't know, embracing the suck. Or it's like the Nicolas Cage, Pablo Pascal meme that's been going around, and it's like the new Rapids fan versus the old Rapids fan in that kind of a situation. I think it's difficult. Obviously there's a great small community that I think gets way too much crap for the fact that the Rapids don't have 17,000 people going to games regularly as opposed to 14,000 people. There's wonderful people in the South Stands. C38 pound for pound can contend. The difference is that Timbers Army gets 700, 800, or I don't know, however many that section of the stand holds. It could be a few thousand. And the reality is C38's 200, 300. And so I don't think that should be diminished. It's a lot of people who really love Colorado. It's a really outdoorsy vibe and everything. So there's a lot of similar parallels where I could take a Timbers fan who really likes hiking, or I could take certainly an RSL fan or one of the Canadian markets, for example, and I could plop them in. There's in the multiverse of every single Portland Timbros listening to this right now, there is an alternate reality of them where instead of living in Portland, they live in Denver, and they're just as happy with their social circle, just as happy with what they're doing outdoorsy. Beer's still really good. The commercial stuff that's available that adults are allowed to have, possibly in gummy form as well, is still available as well. The difference is that the stadium's a little bit smaller, the atmosphere is not as nice, and you haven't won an MLS Cup as recently. And so I think that gets diminished too much. From an on-the-field standpoint, obviously losing Jack Price has massively hurt this team and lowered the expectations. I do not have them making the playoffs right now, and I made that promise after we found out that I made that prediction after Jack Price got hurt. There's still a team that's work in progress. I still think there's a lot of new players who are going to embed in and improve. Robin Fraser has proven he can get a lot with very, very little, so I still think there's more to be had on that front. Diego Rubio hasn't really settled in. I'm starting to wonder, is Kevin Cabral going to end up being a bust as well? But, from a Rapid standpoint, with how much they spend or how much they don't and everything, you just kind of want relevancy, you want some fun soccer, and you want to not win the wooden spoon and everything. And I could understand where fans are concerned that one or several of those things are going to occur this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable, right? I will say, though, the draw against Austin, had me hyped. I think it honestly should have been a W. I mean, you think about how big Stuver came up in that match and how many saves he actually had to make. It could have been a bloodbath. I mean, when you really, really think about it, and just based on the eye test alone. But with that said, I still that should be encouraging enough. I know it's tough times for the club, but I do believe the market and the club have a lot to kind of show for the work they're putting in. When you transition out to that market, I'm curious on a personal level. And you mentioned before, right? If Portland fans were to transition out to Colorado, I lived in Seattle for 6 years as a Dallas fan, and I remember considering Colorado as our next stop for a few years or whatever the case may be, because of how much similarities there really was between the two cities. I don't know. When you think about your transition over to that market, what did you really have to do to embed yourself, right? To become a Rapids fan, to become, I don't even know what the term is for a Colorado native. But at the end of the day, like to make sure that you could be defined as the rest of that city defines themselves culturally. What was that transition like? What were you actually doing?
Yeah, well, from a media standpoint, it's relatively easy because, Jose, it's a small media community. Like, you show up regularly and everybody knows your name and you put out consistent content and everything. That bar's relatively low, or at least I should say it was when I was there. There's, a new crop of some younger people, hopefully, that I want to believe were inspired by me, inspired by Mark Goodman, inspired by some of the work that obviously under multiple people the Denver Post has tried to put out in covering the team as well. So I hope that's healthier. But, realistically, I've had a number of conversations. Had a talk with one of the presidents at C38 a couple weeks ago, or 2 months ago, maybe now, on the podcast and everything. And the supporters group, I think, has had a really good reckoning and an understanding about how open they can be, and maybe areas where if they're not super welcoming and they don't have like somebody come up with a name tag and ask your name at the tailgate or everything, some people can think that they come off as standoffish. I think the group's big enough and welcoming enough that honestly, like, you go to the tailgate, you sit in your stands and everything, you go to a couple events, the team will put on a watch party. It's pretty easy to meet people. Colorado people, they're happy, they're active and everything, and then you find one thing that you have in common and you're good to go. And so in that regard, Jose, like, I've had a few friends that have moved to Denver. I have a really good friend from high school who's thinking about moving, who's a little bit introverted. She has her PhD. She's worried about being social. And I'm like, honestly, just like start go hiking. And then she was like, but what if I don't talk to people when you go hiking? And I'm like, every single person says hello to you on the trailhead and everything. I'm currently in monk mode. I'm not in a dating space or whatever, but one of my friends who's a really good accountability partner for me, he said, like, Matt, the first thing that I know when you're back on the dating scene and actually looking to get a girlfriend and everything isn't going to be you downloading an app. It's going to be you straight up asking a girl for her number on the chairlift and everything. So you find one really big outdoorsy activity, you will find your community, you will find your tribe. You find whether it's foodie, whether it's the parks, whether it's the beer, whether it's the whiskey or something, you find something to take place in Denver as opposed to in the mountains, you will find a community as well. And if you have enough in that regard that's in common, you'll find the Rapids community. One of the things, I don't know that I think that I've coined this, but one of the sayings that we have on HTHL as far as the Rapids community of, if you care about soccer and you care about Colorado, like, you're already a member as far as I'm concerned. And so I try to be super welcoming in that regard. As a transplant, as a convert myself, I like to think the community has and is continue to becoming even more welcoming in that regard.
I love that, man. And it's great to hear, in all honesty. And I think that, for me, I hear similarities from, the Pac Northwest when I lived there. Of course, Texas can, in some circles, can be a very divisive community. In other circles, can be a very friendly community. I think it's the experience is what you make it. But it's great to hear that you've become so embedded in that community that it feels very much like home. It sounds like it anyway. With that said, let's talk a little bit now about your content journey, which is longer than most guests that we have on this show. Yeah. So I really want to kind of, talk a little bit first about the motivation. Putting yourself out there in the form of content, both audio and written, is a massive leap that even in this day and age, even with COVID and everything else that we've been through, so many aspiring creators just are scared to make that jump, right? And I would like to make your journey as relatable to them as possible. And so when you think about everything that you were kind of maybe battling mentally before taking that leap, and maybe it wasn't even a tough decision because of maybe the lack of content that was out there. But talk to me about the early days, right? Your content creation journey. Where did it all start with your editorial career? And how did that kind of scale into, your podcast and everything you're doing now?
Yeah, so, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned this a couple minutes ago, but I started with Last Word on Soccer, Last Word on Sports back in 2014. Picking to start right before our World Cup was a really good space. And I was in grad school at the time, Jose, getting my master's degree, and I didn't really have a good outlet or something that wasn't just solely focused on that. And so, I was obviously, I was watching hockey, I was watching sports, I was relatively active on social media. And so I ended up just following this one random blog that, it turns out was looking for staff. And I was like, this is a fun thing that I could spend like 3 to 5 hours a week, or like one, weeknight or something, just distracting myself with something else. And that's really what this has been like, even though, there's ways to monetize it in which you could call this a side hustle. You could call this a part-time job potentially, or at least you would have had Burgundy Wave obviously stayed with Fox, and I've had that stipend opportunity as well. But this is just, it's a pleasant distraction to use the other side of my brain that's not being used 50 hours a week as a professional engineer. And that's something that I welcome. It obviously comes with a social activity as well, and social connections and everything. It allows me to network. There's a bunch of people who I've been talking to for 9 years now who live on the other side of the country who I've never actually met in person, who I'd be so excited to do so as well. So I've got a local community. I've got a community that is the soccer internet, which is wide and vast and diverse and generally positive. I think it can be.
It definitely can be.
I do a good job of vetting the right kind of people that I want to bring into my proverbial tent as well. There's no toxicity over here other than being upset about the Rapids as far as I'm concerned. And so that's been really positive. Where I think that's kind of morphed was I stayed long enough at Last Word to the point where I had all the institutional knowledge to where I was gradually just able to climb up it's not a corporate ladder because none of us were getting paid enough, obviously, but climb up the ladder. So it made sense for me to be that next person. And I can't remember what law this is in economics, but it's Jose, where like the most technically good people rise to the level of their incompetency. That was kind of what I had a little bit to where ultimately became the managing editor at Last Word. I was there for a really long time. I really liked it. We needed some fresh blood and everything, and I wanted energy to do other stuff. To your point about inspiring other content creators, I'll bring up two things specifically. One was the first good bit of advice that I got from my original editor at Last Word, where he was commenting on, some of our beat writers are going to go into MLS markets, and it's New York or it's LA, for example, and it's the local newspaper. I think at the time, MLSsoccer.com still had beat writers. This was prior to The Athletic. And so you had 4 or 5 people that were just at bigger outlets, bigger websites, had been there longer, had a larger following. They were going to ask the basic obvious question, write the obvious narrative to come out of something. And we were just kind of bottom of that. Of that pile. And so his approach was find the one narrative that nobody's talking about, find the one player that nobody's talking about, interview that guy for 5 minutes, and then write a piece about that. So fundamentally then, from that standpoint, the starting of my writing about the LA Galaxy wasn't necessarily, let me try and repeat what Corner of the Galaxy or what MLSsoccer.com is doing or what Kevin Baxter at the LA Times is doing, they're going to write their 5 or 6 things. What's the one then other narrative that nobody's talking about that Galaxy fans should be thinking about? So from that standpoint, I'm writing the content that I would want to create or that I would want to exist. And that was really the origin story for Holding the High Line. I had known my now co-host and one of my best friends in the world, and he's probably going to be a groomsman at my wedding if I ever get married. If I find that girl on the chairlift on Sunday, and and his name's Rabbi Mark Goodman. Most of your listeners probably know him as Rapids Rabbi, Soccer Rabbi on Twitter. And we were talking for a while, and so we had mentioned this in passing to each other, and then had the thought separately of, there's all these other team podcasts that are going out. The Rapids media space is relatively small, but there should be a podcast dedicated to this team. So when FC Dallas fans who are obsessed with podcasts and YouTube channels and video streams and everything are looking for that kind of content, there's an equivalent from a Rapids standpoint. And then Mark and I were having a bunch of other conversations, and we were like, this is really good. And even though we're like a beer in or whatever, like this is something where like I wish other people were in on this conversation. I wish we could share this with other people. So fundamentally, we thought there should be a podcast about the Colorado Rapids. We're both really good at talking about the Rapids. We're good at writing about the Rapids. We should talk about the Rapids. We should record that and then turn it into a podcast. So I would say, like, fundamentally, if you're stuck on anything from a content creation or anything, if there's a really specific niche that's into it, either around the team or what you want to focus on that's not out there or not being done well, then fundamentally, like, a really easy step to where it's like, Jose, it's like you're a key guy. Like, this is the thing you can't not do, is realizing that you can create the content that you wish existed. And so I think we've done a really good job of that. And I think ultimately we've inspired other people to start writing about the Rapids. We've inspired a whole bunch of other content, and now there's a joke when HTHL takes a week off, there's still 4 hours of other content from other people doing it in different ways, not necessarily at our level. We're really good at our particular niche, but like, I like to think on some level, like, how Bruce Arena has his coaching tree, that there's now a media tree that was founded out of some aspect of either Burgundy Wave or Holding the High Line. And regardless of how bad this team is and how small the community is, I'm proud of that.
Yeah, you should be. No, rightfully so. And what's crazy? I like to think that, folks like yourself and creators like yourself have helped this massive wave of independent media and journalism that just didn't exist 10 plus years ago, right? You think about all the leaps and bounds that independent media has taken over legacy media, so much so that you're seeing legacy media, not just in soccer, but in American football and other sports, sort of mimic the type of content that you're seeing, right? The Manning cast for Monday Night Football, the Nickelodeon streams that we've seen for some of those games. You're starting to see them kind of mimic what independent media has been doing through channels like on YouTube or Spotify podcast or whatever the case may be, because it works. It's relatable. And now you have We Are Austin TV come out, the Voices of the Black and Gold, Atlanta United Fan TV, right? There's all these independent outlets that have popped up out of the woodwork and are using the internet to create the voice of the next generation of fans. How important, from your perspective, is this wave of independent media? Like, is it going to overtake legacy media at some point and really be kind of what we consider to be just mainstream news for the sport?
Overtake, no, or at least, like, I think it's going to have to go to the point where it almost becomes like where it hits critical mass and it's bigger than ESPN, like, to be on that level, I think. But I think it serves an important role. First of all, it's on the grassroots level, it still has, I think, the most easy access that you have of everything. I know, I don't remember where I heard this, for example, but it was some beat writer who was covering European leagues and was coming around and doing stuff in MLS, and he was like, the amount of access you get just because I think teams are so desperate in order to get content is kind of a big deal. I would been at Last Word for 2014. I'd covered a couple of LA Galaxy games. I moved here. So this would have been the start of the 2016 season. So I'd literally covered 2 years of a USL championship team, never stepped foot in an MLS press box at all. And I send one email and I provide some stats on how Last Word on Soccer get some clicks, get some traction, has over 1,000 followers, and then I'm committing to covering the Rapids. And immediately, like, I'm talking to Pablo Mastroeni that first game of the season. which was against the LA Galaxy, fittingly. So, so access is super easy. I think it's grassroots because I think for a lot of people, it starts from a source of fandom. There's obviously a journalistic component, and where I still think the sport is from a financial standpoint, and certainly people willing to support media, and obviously everything that's gone on at Vox and Fansided, and if we're to believe the unconfirmed report about how many subscriptions are not being had to Apple TV. I think, unfortunately, still, like, the sport's not where we think it is, or a lot of what our valuation of it is based on potential than realistically where it is. And so if that gets found out, and if that continues in a way that's, unhealthy, or that doesn't grow it exponentially in the way that, Don Garber's been saying for 15 years that MLS is going to be the league of choice in 10 years, that independent media, I think, is increasingly absolutely necessary. There's NPR, and then there's NBC, covering all of the major stuff that's going on politically and everything. But fundamentally, you need the local public access channel and like Bart Simpson doing the speech on the duck to see what's going on in your immediate local community. And in that regard, on some level, I am just a very good storyteller talking at the fireplace of the local watering hole of what went on down the street. And like, okay, is that as big as, Arsenal and everything? And like, are we as big as we want it to be? But like, on some level, there's a Man United fan who's got to be pissed off that like his season tickets have gone up and there's a tourist next to him and everything. And on some level, there's an ownership of like, it's ours. Like, you can have like, yes, the Colorado Rapids are small. Yes, they're small in MLS. Yes, they've only won MLS Cup or anything. There's only one MLS team that represents the state of Colorado. And you're either getting that here or you're moving to Switzerland.
I agree, man, wholeheartedly. I love your take on that too, right? And you didn't really say that it can't ever become, this behemoth that offers such a unique value point and take in comparison to legacy media. But I kind of agree. I don't think it'll ever overtake. I just think it's going to be something that this next generation of fans leans on heavily, mainly because it's relatable, right? I feel like a fan is talking to me. It's not like when I watch, I don't know, it could be SportsCenter, it could be, you mentioned shows like Undisputed or anything else. While those are very entertaining, and the way that they tell those stories sometimes introduces a layer of drama that I just wasn't ready for, it still doesn't feel like I'm listening to it from a fan who's talking to me as though I was there at the game and would bring it to anybody else. So
yeah,
for me,
and it's for your community. It's for your community too as well. Whereas, I think increasingly I've seen a lot of, again, this is anecdotal, so I'm not sure if this is like confirmed or anything. There's a lot of people that like are increasingly getting not turned off by Extra Time or like the other stuff that's generally covering the league, but like the league's too big at this point, Jose.
Yeah.
And with the simultaneous kickoffs, like there's legitimately, if you ask me right now in 10 seconds to name every single team from the Eastern Conference, I'd miss somebody. Like, the league's too big. And so I appreciate these national media outlets that want to cover it and cover it well and be professional, capital J journalists. But, on some level, the league's too big to where this little stuff falls through the cracks. And somebody who's in our space, who's going to every single game, who's hyper-focused locally on this, has all of those details that those fans still care about, and again, can still coexist in that major ecosystem. You don't have to be the beat writer for the local ESPN channel. You don't have to be at ESPN Charlotte covering Charlotte FC in order to provide the information that could end up on MLSsoccer.com, or that Jeff Carlisle could quote retweet, or that, ultimately Alexi Lawless is going to get burned for talking about in his, Twitter live streams or something. And so, you can be because the league knows how important still independent media and accessing and catering and providing a platform for that is, we're still going to have a purpose, and the purpose can still be local and can still be at times relevant nationally. I've made this joke a few times off air, Jose. I'm not sure if I've ever actually said it publicly. Like, on some level, Clipper Darrell is like a Clippers super fan, and he's been a season ticket holder for like years and years, even when the team was bad and everything. And like, obviously now the team's been relatively good in the last couple of years, but at some point, 82 nights out of the year, a fan base from another NBA team cares about what's going on from the Clippers and wants to know what a Clippers fan has to say. And when there's only one of them who's remotely decent or funny on Twitter, because there's only 13 Clippers fans in all of Los Angeles, that's absolutely relevant. Like, on some level, like, if like we have a purpose to our local community, but I also don't think that the Rapids community should be diminished from a number standpoint when we get just as many downloads from the state of Georgia for holding the Highline, because Atlanta United fans are looking for that. And I absolutely think there's value. And if there's a way that the independent media can kind of coalesce, interact with each other, and have relationships with everybody and everything, that can still have a purpose and have a network and have interaction and churn out content and collaboration and still be a value and create a national community, even if it's not through legacy media. And I think fundamentally then that's grassroots media for a grassroots fan base and a grassroots sport. And that's for a community in ways that so much more the other more corporate sports like the NBA and the NFL are not and will never be.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And that's a fantastic way to kind of, I don't even want to add another value point. I think you summed it all up extremely well. But you did mention one thing that stuck out really well to me. I know we're kind of getting close on time here, but I'm really curious for your take. You mentioned the league's very big, extremely big, only getting bigger. They're already talking about the next 3 expansion clubs, right? Next 3 expansion cities. At some point, we're going to be crossing the 30 mark, right? We're at 29 now. We're going to be at 32 very soon. I think the goal is probably to get to 40? What does, with all this expansion, but then combined with the rumblings on social media and Twitter about how we're still missing the mark in terms of engaging new fans, in terms of hitting revenue projections or hitting subscription projections, like what's it really going to take for the perfect growth storm to really hit not just MLS, but I would say soccer in America, right? What's it really going to take for it to make that jump into a top 3 sport? I don't want to go as far as saying a top 2 sport, because I think dethroning NFL or NBA is sort of a pipe dream at this moment. But what's it going to take for it to really be considered a serious sport and contender in America?
I think you need to hit critical mass in terms of teams and the fandom and the community, and to an extent the media around them, to be more relevant in your market. How many other MLS teams could we go around, Jose, that are fully filled out? NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB. Am I missing anybody? Where the MLS team is then bottom on this. It's great that there's an MLS team in Chicago, which is the biggest market in the central time zone and everything. But let's be real. The Chicago Fire are the 5th most relevant team in that market. The Rapids are still the 5th most relevant. You could argue with Coach Prime up the road at Boulder that if we're including college teams as well, that they're less relevant than that. You could make an argument. I'm sure there's some hockey diehard fan who could get into an argument with me at a sports bar who would argue the defending national champion DU Pioneers college hockey team is more relevant in sports in Denver than the Colorado Rapids are. I'm not going to touch that problem. But so it speaks to, you have to be more relevant in your market. You walk in downtown Orlando the day of an Orlando City game, you see a bunch of people wearing purple. I go down, I live 2 miles away from 16th Street, which is our big local public pedestrian downtown street in Denver. There's Broncos gear every 50 feet. With it being opening day for the Rockies and everything, there's probably a bunch of Rockies debauchery that's happening out there as well. We're about to get into the hockey playoffs and everything. You're going to see Avs jerseys and Avs shirts all up there as well. I don't know that if I go, whenever the next Rapids home game is, April 22nd against St. Louis City, that if I walk down from the start of 16th Street to the end of 16th Street, am I seeing more than 2 or 3 Rapids jerseys? So I think relevance in your marketing, have your existing fan base, find ways to expand that, young people, the immigrants as well. I'll be honest, Jose, the Colorado Rapids have done a really, really poor job with the Latinx community, with Spanish speakers as well. And I don't know that that's gotten any better since prior to the pandemic as well. There's a bunch of low-hanging fruit. It's not necessarily the same in every single market, but let's just get to the point where when the Rapids are hosting 4th of July, rather than people thinking about what are they doing over the long weekend, going into the mountains or something, it's let's go to a Rapids game or something like that, then I think you're getting somewhere. The LA Galaxy now, they're not even the most important soccer team in their own market as well. But if you can get to the point where you're at least on par with what that lowest level market team is in your individual market, I think then at that point, soccer is more relevant in that market. And then, MLS is already growing internationally because young players and, Yanks abroad and everything. But we need to get better at home. When you compare it to other markets and other countries that are, sickos for soccer and everything, there's African nations that, you've got 5 times as many people watching the Premier League as going to their own domestic league. And so I think that's a similar, that's a comparison where there's the appetite's there. You need to find a way to tap into that. You need to find a way to get the Arsenal fan who goes down to the Celtic every single Saturday to say, okay, I'm still an Arsenal fan. I'm still a Euro snob and everything. The Rapids are the side dish on the main dish that is me, that is me taking an Arsenal football club. I think if you get there, I think you're going to slightly improve. To use another hockey reference, Jose, there's a joke that you see in legacy media, usually people focusing on the NBA and the NHL, the NBA and the NFL, who will say there's 20,000 hockey fans in every single market. They all have season tickets. I think we would have an accomplishment if at some point in the next 5 to 10 years, you've got those same talking heads saying there's 15,000 MLS fans in every single city in America. They all have season tickets.
Man, God, that would be amazing. I can't tell you, man. And there's nuances to every single market, right? You mentioned just being more relevant in your market, whatever that may be. I think for my market specifically, Dallas has tried by. It may not have been the right move, right? Moving up to Frisco, completely away from the avid soccer fan base, if you will, a soccer fan base so avid that, grassroots soccer in Dallas is, it's the number 2 market in the country. I don't know. I think there's a lot that each of these respective markets can be thinking about, can be trying to put in place, but I'm still on the hunt for that answer. It's a question I ask almost every guest on this show. Either way, man, this has been a fantastic conversation. I think there's a lot of value for the audience to unpack here. Before I let you go, though, because I feel like we could just be here talking for hours. Before I let you go, what's next for Holding the High Line, Burgundy Wave? There's a lot of transition that a lot of independent media outlets are going through at this moment. What's going to be next for you guys as we continue through the rest of the 2023 season and beyond?
Yeah, so at time of recording, April 6th, 2023, we're still in transition. There's a bunch of stuff that happens when a website and IP passes over that I didn't have a whole lot of control over, unfortunately. Vox was nice enough to let us hang around, but also I think they made sure they held the door open for us on the way out and made sure the door hit us on the way out. So if you type in right now, folks, burgundywave.com, you will go to a broken link. I am hoping in a week, 2 weeks, we'll say April 20th at the absolute latest, 2023, the website will be back up and running. Figuring out IT and WordPress and all of that other stuff is not my area of expertise. It's on writing about soccer. So, we're going independent. And I think like a lot of those SB Nation blogs, Jose, I think we're betting on our community, either that we have enough wherewithal to run a site independently on our own that still has, a couple hundred to a couple thousand people that are going to be dedicated. And hopefully there's enough, to where we can get support financially, maybe a local sponsor, again, focused on the local grassroots community that's going to make that, if not financially viable, at the very least allow us to run at cost. But it's an interesting and strange time. We're going to see how it goes out. I know some sites are probably going to die, and some people who were working on this at the end of last season aren't going to make it to the end of this season. I hope that changes and everything, but I think it's more to the point of your whole platform and everything. I think it even more highlights, going back to your point about legacy media, that now the content that you want now, you have to be able to support that. And with the way the internet and ad revenue works, simply subscribing, like as in getting a notification that they put on new content and then watching it so they get the ad revenue, is not necessarily enough. I think there's enough interest in the Colorado Rapids and people wanting the institution that is the Burgundy Wave that for me, I am a steward of. It belongs to the fans. There's enough interest in that to where I can get a couple dozen people at $5 a month on Patreon and a local sponsor and still have enough support from the club independently to where this platform can still exist even without the greater legacy media infrastructure that SB Nation and Vox had. And if we can do that and be successful, and we can do that in each individual markets, then again, can soccer media and coverage of that be as relevant in the local market in the same ways as the teams, hopefully, and the sport are getting more relevant? Then step in the right direction.
Absolutely, man. I think you hit it right in the head, right? As the growth of the sport, just by nature of that trickle down effect, growth of the sport doesn't just mean growth of, supporting your individual clubs, supporting the market, the community, and more importantly, the media outlets, independent or not, that are going out of their way to create content that is valuable, that offers unique perspectives and makes you think about the game in a way that you probably wouldn't have otherwise. I think all of that perfect storm completely necessary to grow the game to where we all want it to be. Man, Matt, this was a hell of a conversation, man. I really can't thank you enough for being here. I love this. And look, what we're going to do, if you guys, anybody who stuck around to the end of the episode, thank you so much. I'm going to link all of Matt's, one, socials, but then two, the content segments that he himself is a steward of, whether they're it's Burgundy Wave, Holding the High Line, anything else he plans to bring. We'll make sure that's all down there and below so you guys can check it out. And of course, go support, especially if you're in the Colorado market listening to this, go support. It's the only way that we continue to grow the beautiful game. Matt, Pollard, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. But for everyone who hasn't heard of Box to Box or GOLZtv before, obviously, go check that out. Like the video, subscribe to the channel down below. And from all of us here at Box to Box, we'll see you guys next time.